The deserted road cut through the silence of the early morning. The cold wind whistled between the dry trees, and the headlights of a lone car illuminated the damp asphalt. That was when something caught Lucas's attention, a man returning home after a long day at work. In the middle of the roadside, two small silhouettes stood out against the darkness. They were two puppies, motionless, discarded like trash. But there was something even more terrible. Their paws were tied with electrical tape, their mouths sealed the same way, preventing them from barking or even breathing properly. Lucas felt a chill run down his spine. His heart pounded. Without hesitation, he pulled over and ran toward them. One of the puppies was still moving weakly, trembling with fear and exhaustion. The other was motionless. Its half-closed eyes seemed empty, and its body no longer reacted to touch. Desperation took over Lucas. He knew he had to act fast. But was there still time? Lucas felt his heart race as he tore through the electrical tape that kept the puppies' mouths shut. The moment the barrier was removed, the first puppy gasped desperately, sucking in air as if it had just escaped a nightmare. Its eyes gleamed with terror, and its small, trembling body tried to curl up, as if still expecting to be hurt again. It was alive, but in shock. The second puppy, nothing. It remained there, motionless, like a broken doll. Lucas knelt beside the small, cold body, feeling a lump form in his throat. He reached out and carefully touched the puppy. No reaction. The breathing seemed absent, its tiny body completely limp. Desperation began to consume him. His gaze darted to the other puppy, which was now dragging its weak body toward its sibling, whimpering softly. The scene was heartbreaking. Even after everything, that little survivor was still trying to comfort its companion, as if begging it to come back. Lucas's eyes filled with tears. Who could have committed such cruelty? Who would have tied up those puppies, silenced their voices, and left them to die alone in the cold? His chest tightened with anger and indignation. He knew there were cruel people in the world, but seeing the result of such evil right in front of him was something entirely different. Those puppies had been sentenced to death in the most cowardly way possible. But Lucas wasn't going to let that happen. His instincts screamed louder than any doubt or fear. He knew that every second counted. Driven by desperation and the hope that there might still be time, he picked up the motionless puppy in his hands and gently pressed its tiny chest. No response. The other puppy curled up beside it, watching Lucas's every movement as if it understood what was happening. He couldn't give up now. If there was even the slightest chance, he would fight to the end. Taking a deep breath, Lucas laid the puppy on the asphalt and made his decision. Without thinking twice, he tilted the tiny head back and began to gently blow air through its nose, alternating with rhythmic compressions on its minuscule chest. Time seemed to slow down. All that mattered now was bringing it back. But was there still hope? Lucas's heart pounded as he tried to revive the little puppy. With every second that passed without a response, his anguish grew. The cold of the early morning felt even more cutting, and the silence around him made everything more desperate. He continued pressing delicately on the tiny chest, feeling how fragile it was under his hands. Was it already too late? The other puppy, still weak and trembling, approached and nuzzled its snout against its motionless sibling's belly. It let out a soft whimper, as if trying to wake it up, as if pleading for it to fight a little longer. The sight made a lump form in Lucas's throat. That tiny being, even after everything, still had hope. And if that puppy hadn't given up, Lucas wouldn't either. He tilted the motionless puppy's head again and gave another gentle breath through its nose. He performed a few more chest compressions, keeping his breathing controlled. His heart begged for a reaction. He had never done anything like this before, but he knew every movement had to be perfect. Lucas felt a lump tighten in his throat. He suddenly remembered being a child, when he once tried to save an injured bird he had found in his backyard. Back then, he couldn't do anything. The bird had died in his hands, and he had felt helpless, powerless. Now, years later, he refused to feel that way again. Not this time. He clenched his jaw, took a deep breath, and pressed on. Another breath. Another compression. Come on, little one. You have to fight. The despair began to tighten in his chest. What if he had failed? What if he had arrived too late? He felt his hands tremble, the fear of loss seeping in like poison. But then, just as he was about to accept the worst, a small spasm ran through the puppy's body. A choking sound escaped its mouth. Lucas's eyes widened. "That's it. Come on, little one, breathe," he exclaimed, his voice thick with emotion. With another breath of air, the puppy twitched and let out a weak whimper. Its lungs finally responded. It opened its eyes, blinking slowly, as if returning from a nightmare. Seeing this, its little brother began licking its face urgently, as if celebrating. A tear rolled down Lucas's face. He had done it. But they were not safe yet. Now, he had to get them to a safe place before it was too late. Lucas could barely believe what he was seeing. The puppy that, just seconds ago, had seemed lifeless, was now gasping weakly, pulling in air as if it had just escaped death. Its eyes, still cloudy, opened slowly, and a small whimper escaped its trembling mouth. It was alive. Lucas let out the breath he had been holding and felt his legs tremble with relief. He had succeeded, but the danger was far from over. The other puppy wasted no time. As soon as it saw its brother react, it dragged itself over and began licking him desperately. It was as if it needed to make sure this was real, that he had truly come back. Its wide eyes shone under the faint moonlight, filled with pure, instinctive emotion. Lucas stood frozen for a moment, watching their reunion. Even after so much suffering, these two still had each other. But there was no time for celebrations. The rescued puppy was extremely weak, its body still cold and stiff. Its breathing was shallow and unstable, and at any moment, it could pass out again. Lucas knew he had to act fast. He scooped both of them into his arms, feeling how light they were, as if they weighed almost nothing. Hunger and dehydration had brought them to the brink of death. If he didn't take them to a vet now, all his effort would have been in vain. Running to his car, Lucas opened the door and carefully placed the two puppies on the passenger seat. The puppy that had just come back to life remained motionless, only breathing with difficulty, while the little brother stayed by his side, as if refusing to leave him alone. Lucas ran a hand through his hair, trying to stay calm, and started the car with trembling hands. He needed to drive fast, but without putting their lives at risk. He stepped on the accelerator, making the tires screech on the wet asphalt. The dashboard showed it was already past midnight, and the city slept as he sped through the empty streets toward the nearest veterinary clinic. Every passing minute, he glanced at the seat beside him, fearing that the tiny puppy might stop breathing again. The fear of loss still haunted him. When he finally saw the clinic's lights shining in the darkness, a wave of relief washed over him. They had made it. Now, all he could do was hope the veterinarians could save them. He parked haphazardly, grabbed both puppies in his arms, and ran inside. The glass doors slid open, and he shouted for help. The race against time was not over yet. As soon as Lucas stepped into the veterinary clinic, the staff rushed toward him. The desperation in his eyes made it clear that there was no time for questions. A veterinarian took the puppies from his arms and hurried them into the emergency room, while a nurse stayed with him, trying to calm him down. But Lucas couldn't calm down. He had done everything he could, but now, their fate was in the hands of those professionals. The minutes dragged on like hours. Lucas paced back and forth in the reception area, feeling his chest tighten. The silence in the room only made his anxiety worse. He tried to imagine what those puppies had gone through before being thrown by the roadside, defenseless and condemned. Who could have been so cruel? How could someone have looked at such tiny beings and decided that their lives were worth nothing? Anger grew inside him, but at the same time, he knew he couldn't change the past. He could only hope that their future would be different. Finally, the veterinarian emerged from the treatment room, carrying a tired but slightly reassuring expression. The puppies had survived. The smallest one, who had almost not made it, was still weak but was now able to breathe on his own. They were dehydrated, starving, and frightened, but they had no serious injuries apart from the marks left by the electrical tape. With proper care, they would recover. Lucas felt a weight lift from his shoulders, and for the first time that night, he was able to breathe with relief. When he was led to the small infirmary where the puppies were being monitored, his heart nearly melted. The smallest one was sleeping deeply, still exhausted from the fight for life. The other, just as fragile, remained awake, lying next to his brother as if staying there to protect him. Lucas knelt beside them and, with immense tenderness, ran his hand over their heads. The little puppy who was awake lifted his eyes to him, and in that gaze, Lucas felt something different. Gratitude. Trust. A silent plea for him not to leave them there. In that moment, Lucas made his decision. He wasn't going to leave without them. These puppies had been discarded as if they were worthless, but now they had a second chance. And he was willing to give them the home and love they had always deserved. The days passed, and little by little, the puppies regained their strength. At first, they were still scared, insecure, as if they feared they would be abandoned again at any moment. But as Lucas fed them, comforted them, and showed them they were safe, something in them began to change. Their once dull eyes gained a sparkle, their previously frail bodies grew stronger, and their little tails, once still, now wagged every time they saw their new owner approaching. They finally understood that they were home. Lucas decided to name them Hope and Chance. The names carried deep meaning. After all, these little ones had faced the worst of humanity and had still survived. They had been given a second chance when everything seemed lost, and now, for the first time, they knew what true love was. They weren't just survivors, they were warriors. One night, as he watched the two puppies sleeping peacefully on the couch, curled up against each other, Lucas couldn't help but wonder, how many other animals hadn't been as lucky? How many were still out there, suffering in silence, invisible to the world? He felt grateful for stopping on that road that night. If he had simply driven on without looking to the side, those two little hearts would have stopped beating in the darkness, without anyone ever knowing they had existed. He realized that, for those puppies, he had been their only chance. And that made him reflect on how many times in life we encounter similar situations, moments when we have the opportunity to make a difference, but we ignore them out of convenience, fear, or indifference. How many lives could be saved if more people chose to act instead of just lamenting? Hope and Chance now ran free, happy, without fear of being hurt again. But not all abandoned animals get a happy ending. And perhaps the greatest lesson from this story is precisely this. The world needs more people willing to stop, to look, to reach out, because for those on the brink of death, a simple act of compassion can mean everything. Hope and Chance had been saved, but how many others would never get that chance? Lucas knew that a single moment of action had changed their fate forever. And perhaps that was the real message in all of this. Sometimes, stopping, caring, and reaching out is the difference between life and death. The world needs more people willing to be that difference. So, if you ever come across a soul in need, ask yourself, will you be their chance at survival?